Well, again, welcome to this penultimate, next to last session of Questions God Ask Us. And so today, the question we are focusing on is the question, why are you crying? So a question for you and for all those who may be joining us watching this later is this. When was the last time you had a good old-fashioned cry? You know what I mean? When's the last time you had a good old-fashioned cry?
About a week or two ago, when all that went down with my grandson and what all's going on with his stress and with school and dealing with his brother's death.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and some people are criers and some are not criers. I don't know about you, but on occasion, when things are going bad and you're upset, sometimes a good cry can just make you feel a little better, can it?
Oh yeah.
It can just make you feel a little better.
Yeah, it releases those endorphins, really.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a similar question. What are the reasons why we as humans cry? What causes us to cry?
Well, our emotions. I mean, it's either from joyful things that just we're so blessed by, or from sad things, like Kathy said, something that hurt your heart, something that you don't know how to help somebody. You want to help them, but there's no way. And in other words, she can't bring her back her grandson, and so that grieves her for herself and for the family.
I think other things can trigger it now, whether that's in your physical or mental area, like songs. You can hear a song that touches you, whether it's I mean, many times on a Sunday when we've either sang an anthem or even a hymn that just strikes you, and it's just like you can't help, you just feel little tears just coming out of your eyes.
Oh yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's all sorts of reasons that we cry. I mean, of course, we cry when we're sad, when there's a tragedy that happens in our lives. We cry when we're happy. We cry for all sorts of reasons. So I want to read for you this is the end of John's Gospel, and we're in chapter 20 here. And so this is some common stuff we might read on Easter Sunday. Right, so we're going to start here in, let's start in chapter 20, verse 1. We'll just start at the beginning here. Here's what it says. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter, the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen laying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the clothes that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth that has been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She wept. She bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels there, one seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and one at the foot. They asked her, woman, why are you crying? They've taken away my Lord, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. At this, she turned and saw Jesus standing there, but did not recognize it was Jesus. He asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I'll go get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned towards him in Aramaic, cried out, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead and tell my brothers that I am ascending to the Father, to your Father and my Father, to my God and your God." So Mary Magdalene went and shared the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them everything that he had said to her. So here we have this common story from Easter where Mary goes into the tomb and she weeps. And why is Mary weeping is the question.
Don't you think that under the circumstances, all the emotion of just seeing him die, the horrible death he did, and then, the way, just everything, she already had all that on her. And then to get there and think that someone had taken him away, I mean, it was just too much. It's kind of like it, just that last straw that breaks the camel's back, as they say.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know that this has ever happened before, but the only kind of modern day analogy that would be helpful for me is, let's say that your spouse has died and the funeral service is going to be tomorrow. And so on the day of the funeral service, you get dressed up, you head to the church, and you get to the church, ready that his body's going to be there. And you're ready for that. You've emotionally prepared yourself for that service of celebration of life and of life and resurrection. You've prepared yourself for the funeral. And then you hear that somebody, when the funeral home was on the way to the funeral, carjacked the hearse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And taken some, and so your husband, your spouse, or whoever has died has taken it, and they're gone, and nobody can find them, right? You could imagine the grief that might come from that, because in essence, why is Mary at the tomb to begin with? Do we remember from other gospels? Why is she at the tomb?
Well, they were going to put spices on, that was something they typically did, and I don't know if it's always the women, but that's what they had brought, spices with them. And I don't know what else. You remember, Donna?
No, that's what I was thinking. I thought spices.
Yeah, some things to anoint the body. There was this idea in Judaism that your spirit kind of hung around your body for 3 days. And so there were rituals that you would do, ending with the anointment, right? Where after 3 days, all hope is lost, right? And so as you would anoint the person who had died, there was a sense that their presence was still around them and with them. And so it was kind of a holy moment to go and to anoint. And so this is what Mary's coming into, right? That last moment with her Savior, right? To anoint him and to send him on. And she gets there and is just devastated that as she sees it, that some Romans have stolen Jesus's body, right? That's what she thinks has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can certainly understand her devastation in the midst of all of that. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this on page 112. I think it's important. 112, second paragraph. Here's what it says. Many of us, especially men, feel uncomfortable with our tears. Deep down, we regard them as signs of weakness. We try to keep them hidden, even when our hearts are breaking. I cannot count the number of times I have been with persons in tears, either when a loved one has died or after a funeral or during a counseling session, and they had said something like, "I'm really sorry for crying. I got to pull it together." So it's not so much for women, although it can be. But, in the US, we have this culture of, we're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be tough. We're not supposed to cry, right? Have y'all experienced that before? That culture of, hide your emotions.
Well, growing up, I saw that with my own father,
Yeah.
that was his generation. And then being in the military, it was
Oh,
hard
yeah.
for him, to get in touch with his. And I'm thankful that as the time has gone by, I think, more so in yours now, Andrew, that it's not looked down upon as much. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, thankfully, I think you're right. It's traditionally been men are not supposed to cry, but I think that's been changing. I do.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, the big takeaway from that is that tears are fine, right?
Mhm.
Tears help put us in touch with where our pain is, right? We read in the Bible that Mary cried. Who else do we know cried in the Bible?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Right? I mean, Jesus wept, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Correct.
we read that when his friend Lazarus dies, right? He weeps because his
Mhm.
friend is gone, like we all would, all the while knowing that he could bring him back. I mean, he still weeps because of all the heartbreak in that situation. When he comes to Jerusalem, he looks over the city and sees what's going on, and he knows that the city is not going to turn to him, that they're going to
Mhm.
reject him, they're going to miss out on that joy and that peace that he wants to bring, and he weeps because of that. He weeps because of that. Um, Many years ago now, when we had our first foster placement, young lady named Tiana, who's I got to be 9 now. She's big, but
Mhm.
she was 4 when she lived with us, and I remember that first night she came. They dropped her off at like 8 o'clock at night, and she pretty much had the clothes on her back and a little backpack, um, and so thankfully we'd had some clothes stored away, and the next day we went shopping. But I remember that first night. Um, she was okay for a while, and she needed to be cleaned up. So Paige got her in the bath, and we talked to her, and she talked back some. And but when it was bedtime, we got her into bed, and we tucked her in, and boy, she just started crying, just crying, and I miss my mom, and all that you would imagine is going through that. And so we held her for a while, and rubbed her back, and let her get on to sleep. But yeah, for weeks, she would cry every day, because of the grief that she was experiencing, just being separated from
Mhm.
her mom. And to be fair, it was too long, and it was way too long until she was able to see her mom and her siblings again, just because the way the system works. And the way visitation works and all that stuff. And it's interesting looking back on that. I remember my heart hurting at that time, right? Hurting for her. Come 11 months later, she's getting ready to go back home. And of course, that's a whole nother thing of emotions. But I remember thinking back to that first day that she came. Um, and I remember thinking my heart breaks more now than it did, because I
Mhm.
know her and I love her more than I did when I first met her. You know what I mean? You get to know
Oh
someone
yeah.
and you love them, and I know the love she has for her siblings and for her mom. And we would go every week to the Hope Center, where her siblings were, and they'd give us like an hour and a half just to be there, so she could play with her siblings. And but every time we would leave, man, um, just tears and heartbreak. But yeah, I think our tears teach us where our pain is, right?
Mhm.
Our tears teach us where our pain is, and for Tiana, it was the pain of not being with her family, right?
Mhm.
Did
For
she get
Jesus,
to,
sorry.
excuse me, is she able to be with them now?
Yeah, she went home after 10, 11 months in foster care, and
Okay.
family's doing well, doing great. She's doing well in school.
Good.
We are in a great. We are very thankful that mom chose to stay in touch with us, and so we get to see her pretty regularly.
Oh,
Haven't
good.
much during the pandemic, honestly, but yeah, we get to see her and spend some time with them, and they're certainly part of our. Actually, we're her godparents, which is really cool.
Oh, okay.
Uh, so just a really good situation. So it really is, all things considered. Yeah.
Good.
Um, but yeah, and like I said, tears, I think they teach us where our heart hurts. And anybody that says, men shouldn't cry should take that up with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
He set the example for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So certainly tears are okay. And so a question kind of coming out of that. I mean, we all know that when we have a deep personal loss, um, that tears can come from the pain of that, right?
Mhm.
But if tears are representative of pain, I would ask, what else hurts us what else gives us pain? Because, you know, it's akin to getting mad. You know, people say to me sometimes that they, you know, man, I just get so mad and I shouldn't get mad. Well, to me, that all depends on what you're getting mad about, right?
Mhm.
If you're getting mad because, you know, your husband or a wife didn't get all the dishes put up by the time you got home from work, get over it, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
If that's however you want to have your marriage, like talk about it, figure it out, but like, you know,
Mhm.
that's not a great reason to be mad, right?
Right.
But there are certainly some good reasons to be mad in the world, and there are certainly some good reasons that aren't connected to personal loss, for us to cry and to have grief over that. Can y'all think of some areas maybe in your life or in the world today where, um, or even if you don't cry, where you have that grief, where it points to that pain that you feel?
Well, long time ago, we had the one foster child that was removed from my children's home, and talk about injustice, that was painful, but that was also personal. But I see things like all that flooding and from the hurricane and the people that are hurting now, their homes are totally destroyed. I see all those people trying to leave Afghanistan. You
Yeah.
know, I just, there's so many people. When you look at those things, what do I have to complain about?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about that in two ways. One, yes, my heart breaks for all those in Afghanistan and people dealing with floods and loss of loved ones and all the trauma that goes along with that. But I will say that, that idea that because somebody else has it worse than us, that our pain shouldn't matter, I think that's bumpkus. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
um,
right.
and it's and we go through stages in life, right? So as kids, if you were a 4-year-old and somebody was to take away your favorite stuffed animal, right? That is a real and traumatic loss for you.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Now, as an adult, if somebody takes away one of the stuffed animals lying around, I don't care, right? I have 100 others for the kids, right?
That's right.
But for a kid, it's a real and traumatic loss. And if it's one of those situations where the kid loses it, they're on a vacation and they forget it, right? To say, oh, it's just a stuffed animal, that's not helpful.
Mm-mm,
Because for a
mm-mm,
kid, that was a friend that they
mm-mm,
lost. And it's like one of us losing somebody we love, right?
mm.
And so I think it's important to acknowledge that and not to go past that our loss doesn't have to be somebody else's loss, but loss
Right.
is loss, right?
Right.
And our loss matters however we experience it. I also see this a lot with teenagers, right? Especially those who um, teenagers who start dating, right? And so they're 13, 14, 15, they have a girlfriend, boyfriend, they date for 6 months or a year. And anybody ever dated more than one person in their life?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, most of us have, not everybody, but most of us
Mm.
dated people. Maybe you've broken up with somebody, maybe they broke up with you, right? Man, I remember when I was probably 14, and I had my first like real girlfriend. We dated for like 4 months, and I remember when she broke up with me, like my world was crushed, you know, absolutely crushed. I was devastated. I couldn't function for days. Like I was calling her like 100 times on the phone, like just talk to me, and exactly today I can look back on that and laugh, like you're laughing a little bit, but boy, we got to remember in those moments that for a
Mm.
14-year-old going through that,
Mm.
that is their world coming down around them. It really is. And so to acknowledge that loss in a deep way and to help comfort them through that instead of dismissing it,
Mhm.
I think is so important for those of us who work with young folks. So
And I think when I said that, I wasn't just claiming anything. What I
oh
guess I
yeah.
was saying, how some people complain, I guess the piddly complain kind of things, but
Yeah.
but someone did say, I don't know, it was when Kim was going through it, but it stuck with me. When people say, but I hate to complain around you or something because, or because of what you're going through. But someone said one time, if you stub your toe hurts. That's a
Yeah.
legitimate hurt.
Yeah.
May not be the same kind of hurt as I'm experiencing, but it's still to you, it hurts.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you kind of, you have to make sure you realize that, like you say, don't discount anybody else, and don't, just because and some people just more, they're able to endure things more than other people too. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. And also, the flip side of that is also don't think God calls us to be whiners, right?
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
I may have told y'all before that there was a girl I dated for a very short time in college um, that I broke up with because the moment we started dating, all she did was complain about things
Oh,
and
yeah.
whine about things,
Mhm.
and those were things that were real kind of things that were affecting her, but yeah, for those things that truly hurt, we want to acknowledge, but also we want to be sure that we're not just complaining for complaining's sake, right?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to last week when we were talking about being stuck.
Yeah,
People that
yeah,
sometimes the people that complain like that, they've just gotten stuck in that situation and they don't want to move forward.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Becomes a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it certainly can be. It can be,
Yeah.
and it's a habit that I think is human nature. I really do. When my son falls down and has a little scrape on his leg, you would think it's broken, right?
Yeah.
Because it hurts. But boy, he's learned. If I can really sell this, maybe I'll get some
Yeah.
more attention.
Yeah. Milk it
You know what I
broad.
mean?
Yeah.
And and you know, what was I thinking about? I'm sorry, my brain went kaputs. Um, oh yeah, so I see it's a lot of teenagers too, right? Um, I can't tell you when I was working with youth, you know, about half of them, you say, "How you doing?" "Oh, things are good, things are fine." About half of the youth I would talk to, "Hey, how you doing?" Guess what they'd say? "I'm tired."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I get it, they are, house school, house life. "Oh, it's good. I'm just tired." And I vividly remember, and he wouldn't mind me telling you this, a guy named Eric that was in my youth group at one of my former churches, who now is an adult with a great job and all that. But when he was like a junior, he would say that, every time, "How you doing?" "I'm tired." I'd say, and we got to have a great relationship. And I said, "Eric, two things. Number one, think about it. You're not that tired all the time. You can still get up and move. Number two, nobody cares." Nobody cares. And number three, when you get out in the work world and have life and family, you come tell me what tired's like.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
so we had a good conversation about that, and about 4 years later, because he was about 4 years later, he'd graduated, got a good job, but a job where he's working like 12-hour shifts. I mean, he's making good money, but working long shifts and all that. Um, and he came to church one Sunday, and I said, "Well, how's work going?" And he'd obviously remember the conversation. He said, "Well, I understand what being tired's like."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, let's shift gears here for just a minute. Page 114, if you happen to have your book. And actually, if somebody wouldn't mind reading that second paragraph for me, that would be grand.
Starting with like.
You got it.
Okay. Like Mary, we also need to respond to this question. We can do so in one of two ways. On the one hand, we can find someone with whom we feel safe enough to entrust our tears, someone who can be our wailing wall. I will always be grateful for those special people who have come alongside me in my pain, listened without judgment, and held what I have shared in sacred trust. These people have included a caring psychiatrist, several dear friends, and most especially those closest to me. Each of them, at different times and in different ways, has been that wailing wall against which I could shed my tears.
We read 4 more lines.
Oh, yes, sir. On the other hand, we can also share our tears with God. Many of the Psalms in the Bible teach us to do this. They show us how to talk simply and honestly to God about the deep groaning of our hearts and lives. We need to tell God about it.
That's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I love this when it talks about, kind of what's behind our tears and how we get through things. And he talks about 2 ways here. One of which is we have some people that we can confide in, that we can share those tears with, and then ultimately that we also confide in God, right? Again and again and again, I've said, if you want to look at human nature, read through the Psalms. You see
Mm-hmm.
people who are overjoyed. You see people who are happy. You see
Mhm.
people who are devastated. You see people who are angry. You see people who feel like God is closer to them than we can imagine. And you see people who feel like God has forgotten them, right?
Mm.
And all of those are lifted up to God, and God accepts all of those, right? And so whatever we're feeling, we certainly want to take it to God, but also it's so helpful. And I hope you have a friend or family member in your life that you can bring stuff to. And that I won't go too far into this because I've told the story before, but there was a time when we were in the private adoption side of things, and really had for about a year just kind of adoption fall through, and some also some really tragic, at least one really tragic situation as well that were just hard. Um, and so Paige and I were both really struggling, but I can tell you from my perspective, I was really, really struggling with this idea that I feel like God has called me to be a father, um, but it's not happening. And as a matter of fact, we're getting hit with pain and hurt and tragedy again and again and again and again, right, for about a year. And so finally, I called one of my buddies, a guy named Kenny Maple, who's actually an ordained Presbyterian minister now, as of like 6 months ago, which is kind of cool. So I called him, and what I called him to do was not to ask his advice, was not to get away forward. I called him to sit in the mud, so he'd sit in the mud with me. You know what I mean? Like, I was struggling, really struggling. I had no solution in mind. There was no solution right around the corner. But what I needed somebody to do was sit with me, and so I could tell them how I was feeling, and so they could help me acknowledge that feeling as well, right? Not for them to say, "Oh, don't be upset because," or
Mhm.
"Oh, don't worry, good things are coming. God always." No, none of that. I just needed to sit in the mud with a friend, and
Mhm.
sometimes that's what we need, is for a friend to acknowledge our hurt, or for us to acknowledge a friend's hurt, um, knowing that the time will come and we can get through that, right?
Mhm. Correct.
Um, and I tell you that where I see it all the time, is when people who have lost loved ones, whether young, old, doesn't matter, and it'll be 10 years down the road, and they'll say, "Man, I don't understand why this still gets to me." All right, I feel like I should be over this, and I say to them again and again, "You will never get over
Mhm.
this. By the grace of God, we get through it, but you'll never get over it, and that's okay."
Mhm.
The love that we have for those people who are closest to us doesn't go away. It
Mhm.
doesn't go away. Over time, it might get a little easier, um, but it doesn't go away, and that's okay to hurt, even when you feel like you shouldn't. Right?
Right.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have any questions, comments? Or I know both of you have lost spouses, so I'm sure y'all know about that all too well. But anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, on that note, I said, I one time thought to myself, how is it that you can love someone more each day, even after they're gone?
Mm,
And I know a lot of it is appreciation and things like that. But I that's just something weird to me. I mean, not maybe to everybody, but that, like I said, not that love has to stop, because I would always love him,
yeah.
but that it would grow. That was the part that I think has amazed me. But and then on the other side is talking about people that will listen to you, the people that will, if you tell them something and they're telling you, yeah, well, so and so, they're telling you someone's got it worse than you. And that, like our toe stumping thing, it is, I hate that for those people. Or in our case, it was in Ken's family, if anything was going on or whatever with Ken, his mama would always say stuff about his brother, how much worse is, and I'm thinking, A, you don't need to be doing that. And B, all it does is just makes you aggravated with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that idea about love growing even after someone's gone. Um, and I don't know why that happens, but I have a theory. I have a theory. And my theory is, have y'all worked multiple jobs before, or at least multiple positions?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have the same job always?
Mm-hmm. Oh, different.
Yeah. So I always have found when I start a new job or go to a new church, um, I'm always looking back with what I would call a little bit of rose-colored glasses, right? You remember all the good things, but you tend those things that were frustrating or perpetually frustrating tend to get pushed down and to fade away. And so you remember all the good things that happened, and a lot of the negatives fade away. And I think that happens too with those that we love, right? When we lose those that we love, some of those conflicts, which if you think about it, I'm sure you can remember, right?
Yeah.
Some of those challenges or the ways they were that got under your skin, you can remember those. But as you begin to reflect on their life as a whole, I think it's those good moments, those good times, the essence of who they were, that really come to the top of your brain, and that negative stuff begins to fade, which I think in some ways can help you fall in love with them even more, right? Because you're more falling in love with the ideal of who they were, right? That's how we remember them. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I've always thought about that in switching jobs, that I'm not a real stressed out person, but all jobs have their own stress, and all ministry positions have that. And I've always kind of looked back on, oh, it was so good but when I really think about it, it was the same. Right. Right.
But I don't think you'll ever top this one with COVID, though.
I don't know. For all its hardness in COVID, it's been pretty good. It really has been. It's been really good.
Yeah.
Honestly, my grief about it now just comes from that COVID's coming back and we can't do the things we want to do.
Yeah.
And that's really frustrating for me. It really is. So, but we won't go there. Okay, let's move on to the last section here, and hopefully we'll end a little bit early today. He has this chapter about moving from tears to new beginnings. So I'm going to read a little bit from page 116 and 117. And so he talks a little bit about Genesis and how that people were created in the garden and that paradise was lost. And, our early ancestors found themselves living outside the garden, and outside the garden that was meant to be their home. And so on 117 at the top, it says, now, as we move back to the gospel story, keep this Genesis picture in mind of the garden. The garden, which we sinned and got kicked out of, right? Can you see the strong links between the two? Both stories take place within a garden. Adam was called to care for the garden, while Mary mistook Jesus for a gardener. As one writer suggested, John wants us to see a connection between the Garden of Eden and Jesus getting raised from the dead in a garden. There is a new Adam on scene, and he is reversing the curse of death by conquering it. And he is doing it in the garden. In other words, this garden imagery is a powerful reminder that when Jesus met Mary in her tears, he wanted to bring her the resurrected gift of starting over again. I love that. In the midst of our tears, the risen Christ wants to help us to begin again to experience new life and power of resurrection. I really do. And yeah, I think it's absolutely purposeful that, there's a garden tomb, right? There's a gardener around when the life of humanity started in a garden, right? And in that first garden, we see Adam and Eve sin and fall and be kicked out. And then in the new garden, if you will, of Jesus, we see the opposite happen, right? Where humanity's been on the outside and Jesus is inviting us in once again, right? That he is the garden now. He's the place where our life should be grounded, where we are to live and to make home. And I think we find that Mary's tears draw her to the person of Jesus, right? I think that's really, really neat. And so I want to close with this. When you are upset, when hard things happen, where do you go? All right. So Mary went to the tomb to anoint Jesus, right? Where do you go? What do you do? Who do you call when life is hard? When grief comes along, what do you do?
Well, you pray. Because Jesus hears you, whether you get it helps to relieve some of the pain. It doesn't mean your circumstances are going to change
Yeah.
right away, but it does give a peace.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's good to have someone with skin on. We know
Yeah.
Jesus there. I heard a little boy one time saying something about, it was a story about him praying. He said, but I need someone with skin on, so
Yeah.
always, related to that. But so I am grateful for friends and for
Yeah.
you, Andrew, because, you're very compassionate and very always, interested in us, and not that other people haven't been, but, there's just a difference there. So yeah, I think that's it. And just, and as I said before, I hope you always know that we're here for you. You need
Oh,
someone to
absolutely.
do outside of your family,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we, my hope is that every pastor would have, I have some friends and colleagues outside of the church congregation that, like my buddy Kenny, who if I'm struggling, I can call and they can be that kind of support. Because,
Mhm.
one thing I want to be sure of is that I do my best to be my pastor for my people. But what that also means is somebody else has got to be a pastor to me, right? And Kathy Mitchell does that, and I have some friends that do that.
Yeah.
And grateful to have some what I would call good pastors in my life that I can call when I'm in need.
That's good.
I was gonna, because I know you're getting ready to close on Friday, August 27th, in the upper room. There was it was in John 11, 1-16. It was a story of Jesus and Lazarus and Martha, and that's the first time I've ever, how she was always scolded for not wanting, her sister Mary was the important stuff, and so I always thought Martha was just kind of thrown to the side. But in this version of it, he brings up about loving Martha, and then also, because you were talking about one time about sermons, I thought taking that scripture and finding about Martha, how there was a good side there of her and what Jesus saw. But then also, I've always wondered, so once Lazarus, was raised, of course, he eventually would have had to die. What do you think he would have done? What would he have done with his life since he was given more time?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? My hope is that he followed Jesus and made goodness of it, which I hope and expect would happen. But Lord, that's not always the case when people are given a second chance, right? So,
Yeah, and you hear about him joining him as a disciple and going with him. Not that everybody did, and he didn't want everybody to.
Yeah,
But,
so who knows is the answer to that question, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a good
Yeah.
question, Kat. Well, and like when he would heal somebody, sometimes he would say, "Don't tell anybody because my time has not come," or something.
Yeah.
So that always confused me too. That why wouldn't? Because they're going to be so excited if I all of a sudden I was blind, all of a sudden I can see.
Yeah.
I'm going to want to tell everybody. In fact, they can see it if they knew you were blind before. But if you're lame or whatever, if you had leprosy, I mean,
Yeah.
how
Well,
could you not?
that's interesting on two parts. So number one, I think the reason why Jesus didn't want people telling is because he was worried about that. He knew that political violence was coming for him.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
And I think he was worried about that coming too soon before he accomplished what God set him here to do. Right. The second funny part of that is, so Jesus heals people and tells them not to tell anyone. We know about it. So guess what they did?
They told.
Right. Somebody told her it wouldn't be in the book. Right.
That's right. Okay. I never
Which I
looked at
always thought was interesting. But
it.
yeah, I really think when Jesus says don't tell anyone, he realizes that his task is not complete yet. And so he's trying to stave off that political violence that's going to be coming his way. Now, when he gets to if you'll read, when he gets to Jerusalem that last week of his life, there is none of that. Don't tell anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're going to find out who I am.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, and he told the leper to go to see the priest too. So by telling the priest, because get the blood, what you have to do.
Exactly.
So, like I say, no rhyme or reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Good. Well, thank y'all again for joining me today. I hope this was a fun and meaningful session. I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thank you.